Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water to wine, and there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick in Capernaum. Listen for a moment. The term royal official, this is not talking about the centurion. You see, I read a lot of publications, I read a lot of things as part of my job getting ready, but there are poems that they try to say, oh, the gospel writers all read each other's stuff. They were all eyewitnesses. They saw the same things. But John's not referring to something that any of the other ones had recorded. Why? Because he was right there. This is something he saw. And he brings it out because the royal official talks about someone of nobility. He could have worked for Herod, the Tetrarch in Galilee area. He could have been a Sadducee, but he was of the royal nobility. He was of the ruling class. He was wealthy and influential. That's what I need you to lock into your mind. And this royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. Verse 47. And when this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son who was close to death. Verse 48. He said, unless you see signs and wonders, Jesus said, you'll never believe. In other words, he's telling the whole crowd, guys, what is it going to take for you guys to believe? You've seen things, but yet you're still questioning. But then he goes on in verse 49, look at this. And the royal official said, sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said, go. Jesus replied, your son will live. And the man took Jesus at his word and departed. Verse 51. And while he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that the boy was living. Verse 52. And when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Verse 53. And his father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And so he and his whole household believed. Verse 54. And this was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. Now let me reverse and go back over this for us today. If you're taking notes, you can follow me on this end. Because what was it that brought this man to Jesus? You see, he was wealthy, he was influential. And you ever notice that in our culture, it's no different than it was in the time of Jesus, that people who feel like they're in power, or people who feel like they're wealthy and influential, that they kind of almost alienate themselves or insulate themselves from God. They feel like, I don't need God. They're like, oh, all you people who have problems, oh, God's just a crutch for you. You can't handle it. And whereas many today who will try to say, but people often, whether they realize it or not, feel they don't need God because they are really, in essence, attempting to be their own God. And I got money, I got influence, but do you know what? Often, and this is something that we need to recognize, what brought this man? Because he was of the nobility. And when you read the Gospels, what you recognize is this, that people of noble class, ruling parties, they weren't really Jesus' fan. And so, in other words, his greatest difficulties came about from these groups of people. But yet, it was this man, the pain of his son's sickness and near death, gave him the realization that he would seek Jesus, probably to the demise of all of his friends, family, and others around them. But isn't that true that sometimes when life takes a left-hand turn, sometimes when life doesn't go the way you anticipate, and you realize I am powerless, I can't change this situation, that it can be a wake-up call that I need God? That sometimes it's in these conditions, it's in these settings, that God can take it, although God doesn't bring it, because notice, Jesus didn't bring the sickness, but he was willing to help. That's what you need to understand. Some people get angry when problems in life happen. But if you're taking notes with me, here's something important. This is what I want to go to. Suffering can be a means of blessing. Suffering can be a means of blessing. Now, that's not very popular in America or in the West. But if you're honest, one of the things that people push back on today is say, well, how can God be a good God if there's suffering in our world? With the false realization, where did suffering come from? Last time I checked, that we as human beings make a mess out of life. Why would we blame God with the things we create? But we tend to do that all the time. Like everything is God's fault until it's my responsibility to do something that God's asking me to do. And then I have every reason not to do it. But if God doesn't do something I think he should do, I'm angry at God. That's the way culture gets. And there are many people who hijack other people's testimony of suffering and say, this is proof there can be no God. But if you actually read, many people come to faith through difficulties and adversities.